Right now, we want to welcome to the show. We got Steve Kirschner, Senior Associate Athletic Director in Sports and Information and Media Relations Director at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Welcome to the show, Steve. How you doing?
Good morning.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Oh, man,
Good
Steve,
morning. Good
great
morning.
to hear from you, my friend.
Steve, you have a phenomenal book that's out, a part of a phenomenal book that's out, Together, The Amazing Story of Carolina's Basketball 2021 and 2022 season. Man, what a story. The fact that I lived it, it makes it even more fun to actually read about it and be a part of it. Tell us about how this came about and what made you guys want to say this is the time to document this one.
Well, we've done championship books. Adam Lucas, Matt Bowers, and myself, and with some outstanding photographers. We've done books on the three previous NCAA championships in 05, 09, and 17. And one thing with a book, in terms of promoting a book and selling a book, you really need to make that determination before the championship game so you can get the word out. So we had a decision to make as to whether we were going to do a book about last year's season, and we had to do it even before the Kansas game. So we met down in New Orleans, and everybody agreed that, regardless of the outcome of that night, the story of that season, how the team turned it around, the so-called Iron Five, the couple of wins over Duke. It was just something. Hubert's first year as the head coach. There were a lot of storylines in there that no matter what happened against Kansas, there was a lot of material there and a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff that we wanted to share with people. So that's how the book came about. Some people say, why'd you do a book when you didn't win a championship? Well, one, we had to make the decision before the game, and two, it was just a compelling enough series of stories and narratives that we felt our fan base in particular would be interested regardless.
Wow. We're talking to Steve Kirschner, who's the author along with Adam Lucas and Matt Bowers on Together, The Amazing Story of Carolina Basketball 2021-2022 season. And you answered one of my questions, but I tell you, you could have stopped. You could have wrote a book just after the final game over at Cameron against from my perspective.
Probably so.
Yeah, because and my question is, like, at some point during the season, were you guys even thinking about a book, or you just thought about it during the Final Four, as you mentioned earlier?
I think sort of in between. I think we started talking about it during the March run during the NCAA tournament. As the season was going on, a lot of people weren't sure whether we were going to be in the NCAA tournament. I think Coach Davis felt we were secure, and a lot of people thought we were secure. I think the win in Cameron certainly, I think that put our resume for sure in the tournament. But really, once we started, you're an 8th seed. You got to go to Texas to play the defending national champions in Fort Worth, 45-minute or hour drive from Waco, Baylor's campus. So, even just because we'd won in Durham didn't mean that, sure, this team's going to end up in the Final Four. They're going to end up in the national championship game. There was a lot of work to do. So I think it was something that we kind of talked about more and more, particularly as we got to Philadelphia and that roll. You get on a roll in the NCAA tournament. You build your momentum sometimes in the tournament, and that momentum started building. But it really started building sort of mid-February after we lost to Pitt and went up to Virginia Tech. So it wasn't a team that just did well in the tournament. It kind of finished the regular season strong and then really carried that through March.
Wow.
Awesome. We're talking to Steve Kirschner, Senior Associate Athletic Director of Sports Information and Media Relations at UNC, co-author of Together, The Amazing Story of Carolina's 21-22 season. I know you want to give everything in the book, but can you talk to us a little bit about if you address the storyline, the hype at the beginning of the season, bringing in Hubert Davis as a brand new coach, also making history as the black head coach, and going into the first beginning of the season, and then for some of the fans it could be a little bit disappointing. How did you or the team keep that belief system up to know that you were going to be there, or that you could be there at the end of the year in the NCAA?
Hubert preached all year that he thought this team could play for the national championship. And I think there were a lot of people who doubted that. And when you looked at some of the scores of the games, I think there was some reason that people had reason to doubt that.
Right.
The Kentucky game,
President Cup included. I mean, I had my doubts.
The Kentucky game was a 30-point game, and Tennessee was a one-sided game, and even in January we lost back-to-back games, Miami and Wake, by a total of 50 points. And not only that's just not really kind of what happens typically with a North Carolina basketball team.
Right.
It certainly isn't typical of what happens to a team that's going to play for the national championship or go to the Final Four. But he never wavered. It's hard to learn how to be a head coach at the University of North Carolina, and I've said that regardless of the sport. I don't care if it's fencing, golf, or men's basketball. If you've never been a head coach before, no matter how long you've been an assistant coach, no matter how long you've been in the game, whether as a player, as an assistant coach, or a broadcaster, or whatever, when you become the head coach, regardless of the sport, it's difficult because you're making decisions that are you're for the first time. Hubert said all year, the biggest difference between what I'm doing now and what I did the previous 9 seasons as an assistant coach. Before then, I made suggestions to Roy Williams, and now I'm making all the decisions.
Right.
And the decisions that there's things that you think about and you plan for, and you've got weeks to prepare for, and then there are things that just come up on the fly, and you've got to make a decision immediately. And when you're doing it for the first time, like anything, it's difficult. But when you're doing it in a high-profile program on national TV every game with high expectations, it's doing it for the first time. He said recently that for him the biggest difference with the second year is he kind of knows where the curveballs are going to come from. Still don't know when they're going to happen or where they're going to come from, but has a little bit better idea of going into the second year. Well, all this was new, and we had a new. Certainly a new player with Brady Manick, and we had some other new pieces. And it was so different the year before. We had guys last year, prominent players playing in their sophomore year, Caleb Love, R.J. Davis. Well, their freshman year was so unlike any other. I mean, we played through COVID, but, the classes were all remote. They went straight from their dorm room to practice and then back to the dorm room. And they weren't interacting with the campus and with other students like in a normal year. The 2021 season was just very different. Yeah. And so even though they'd a lot of experience, last year was new for them too. So early in the season, everything was still kind of up in the air, and the team built. And one of the things I think Carolina basketball has shown through the years is typically the teams get better over the course of the year. And that was certainly the case with Hubert's team last year as well. We got better. I think we had one of the worst games was the Pitt game in mid-February. And by score, it was maybe an 8 or 9 point game, but it was at home and we didn't play well, and no disrespect to Pitt, but they didn't win another game the rest of the year. They lost their next 5 games. So that loss really put a lot of doubts in people's minds, and that's why I think one of the most important wins was that next game at Virginia Tech, because they were really playing well, and for us to come off the Pitt game and win that game, that's where the momentum really started to turn in our favor.
Wow, outstanding. We're talking with Steve Kirschner, who's the co-author of Together, the amazing story of Carolina basketball's 2021-2022 season. My last question for me, I want to ask, typically through this process, although you lived it, you were there, you were part of almost every moment, every second. Once you went through this process of putting this book together, what is it that you walked away from that you probably say to yourself, I never really noticed that, I never really knew that, while we're in the midst of it?
I think one of the most interesting things was to hear Coach Davis say after the season, when we talked to him for the book, we talked to him about how the team played a little bit different starting in January. Typically, Carolina basketball had a traditional way of playing, particularly with 2 big guys. And he said in January, and it was out of necessity, Dawson Garcia, who had transferred in and then left after the mid-season to go home to tend to some family members who were very sick. Dawson was still part of our team, but he'd gotten a concussion early in the Boston College game in early January, and didn't play that game, didn't play a few games after that. And we started to spread the floor a little bit more with Brady Manick. And Brady he had the size, but he didn't really want to be an inside player either. So Coach Davis, he talked about how he started coaching kind of like he did with his JV team, because he coached our junior varsity team for 7 years. And when we coach a JV team in college, you don't have 6'11", 6'10" guys. You know, your 5-man, your post player might be 6'3", 6'4".
Right.
And with Dawson out and Brady's comfort level, he started having Brady kind of sprint down and go to the corner. And that gave Armando more room around the paint. It gave Caleb and RJ a little bit more room to get to the basket. And for whatever reason, that kind of clicked. And that kind of turned things a little bit more. Our offense got a little bit more fluid. And that's when you notice, if you look at the game-by-game logs through the season, that's when Armando really started to his game started to ascend. All of a sudden, a 20-rebound game against Virginia, and then a 20-rebound game against Virginia Tech and Louisville, and he started to get the double-doubles going, and he started to get his point production up, and things started to change. So I thought it was interesting that, in one way, the JV program and what Hubert learned as the coach of that,
wow,
was able to adapt what he had done for 7 years as the JV team to what he was now doing with the Carolina varsity team. I think that's one of the most fascinating aspects.
Steve, you just gave hope to every JV coach.
Exactly.
And what's funny, Steve, when we talked to Hubert, actually maybe one of the players was Caleb Mando, how they told us we started running different plays. He told us that we started playing differently, and that's similar to what you're talking about. We're talking to Steve Kirschner, of course, co-author Together, the amazing story of the Carolina basketball 2021-2022 season. Last question, Steve. And just real quick, you knew Hubert when he got to Carolina as a player on the team, so you've known him for a long time.
I did. I was one of the SIDs when he was here.
That's exactly right. So let's talk about the maturation process of him as a player. Now him as a head coach, and outstanding season he had last year.
Well, I remember his freshman year, one of the great Carolina Duke games was the 1989 ACC championship game down in Atlanta. And Duke had Danny Ferry, and Leitner was a freshman, and Bobby Hurley. Carolina had J.R. Reed and Scott Williams and Jeff Lebo, one of our assistant coaches now. He was the senior captain on that team. And those two teams really didn't like each other.
Right.
And they played still to me, the most intense sporting event that I've ever witnessed in person in the championship game. And we had a bunch of guys fall out. Hubert didn't play a whole lot that year as a freshman. He played some spot duty. But I remember going in, he had to go into the game with about a minute to go in the ACC championship game, because all of our guys had fouled out. And he was so nervous that, like Kevin Madden had to, on the free throw line, had to kind of grab him and physically say, stand here. and it was just then to watch that maturation. Yeah. By the time he was a senior, Hubert was putting up 30 points a game. There was a stretch late in the year where he had 4 or 5 30-point games. He was fantastic. One of the great Carolina Duke halves of basketball is the 1992, I think it was their senior. It would have been the last game of the regular season. Leitner senior day game. Hubert and Christian, who I don't know if a lot of people know this, but became almost best friends when they played, I think it was either in Dallas or Detroit. They became very close friends. That game, they put on one of the great halves of basketball, the first half. Christian was fantastic. Hubert was fantastic. And they just went back and forth. Duke ended up pulling away in the second half. But Hubert was a great player at North Carolina. And he was so quiet. He was such a quiet leader. Every player on the team, though, respected him so much. I always tell the story about how after the game, every member of the media wanted to talk to Hubert, no matter what happened, no matter whether he scored 16 or 35 points. Everybody wanted to talk to him. And he talked in a very soft voice, very mild-mannered. And when he got drafted by the New York Knicks. And I saw him the day after the draft in the parking lot behind the Smith Center, and he said, "Hey, I'm going up to New York for my, introductory press conference. Do you think there'll be anybody there?" And I said, "Hubert, you're going to the media capital of the country. Yes, there's going to be people there." I said, "Let me know how it goes." And when he came back, he goes, "Oh my gosh." He goes, "I'm so glad that I did all those interviews, after games." He goes, "I couldn't believe how many people there." I said, "It was New York." But he never wanted to be a coach. He never wanted to be a broadcaster. He said the only thing that he ever really wanted to do was he wanted to be a player at North Carolina. Everything else he's kind of taken as it came, and an opportunity came after playing in the NBA for 12 years. An opportunity came to work at ESPN. He took it. Then Coach Williams called out of the blue. He wasn't looking to get into coaching, but Coach Williams called and said, "I'd like you to be on my staff." So he did it. Then Coach Williams talked to him at the end of the 21 season and said, "I want you to replace me as the basketball coach." And so he did it. And so really being a player at North Carolina is the one thing that he says that I absolutely wanted to do, and he was able to do that at a very high level.
Story.
That's a great story, man. I'm pretty sure a lot of those stories are in this book. Huh? It's amazing, Mac. This is incredible. Steve, it could be on a lot of people's Christmas lists. I'm pretty sure coming up.
I hope so. People will really enjoy it. And the photography, Maggie Hobson, who works in the athletic department, Maggie took most of the pictures in there, and they're fantastic. If it had no words in there at all, it's still a great keepsake because of the great photography.
Outstanding. As always, it's a pleasure having you on, Steve.
Thank you,
Looking
Steve,
forward
so
to talking
much.
to you again.
Great talking. I appreciate you having me on.
Thank
no
you.
problem.